Hello, Math Stars. So we are going to move on to the operations of fractions. We covered addition, and now we're moving to subtraction. There's going to be 4 pages that deal with subtraction. Page 49, page 50, page 51, and page 52. Okay? We are going to start by just reviewing. There's 2 sections we have to look at when it comes to subtracting fractions. I'm not going to reread this one because we read this over when we learned about the adding. One thing we have to remember is that we have been doing adding and subtracting fractions probably for a good month or so before we left school. So none of this should be completely new, but I do understand there's lots of steps being put together, and we do have to remind ourselves. Okay. The biggest thing to remember when you subtract fractions with unlike denominators is you need to find a common denominator by finding the least common multiple. Okay? And of course, we have to simplify if need be. We have to convert improper fraction to a mixed number if need be. Those are all choices you have to make with a given problem. Okay? So one thing that is new that we have to look at, again, this was covered in class, so it's not completely brand new, but it's not included in the addition. So I just want to read this part over. And again, this is page 42 in your booklet. Okay, make sure you can see all of that. Subtracting mixed numbers with regrouping. So that's the only tricky part, but once you get the hang of it, it goes pretty smooth. When subtracting fractions, if the top numerator is smaller than the bottom numerator, you must borrow from the whole number. So what they're referring to is if I have 3 3/9, so this was my original problem, 3 3/9, take away 1 5/9. So if when they say the top numerator is smaller than the bottom numerator, that's what we're talking about. Just like a simple subtraction problem that we solve all the time. If the top number is smaller, you have to borrow. A lot of times I'll tell my kids, okay, hold up 3 fingers, now take 5 away. You can't do it because you don't have enough. You have to borrow. So you regroup the whole as a fraction with the same denominator. Since the denominator is 9ths, the whole is 9/9. So what that is saying is we have to borrow from the whole. Okay, so we're going to take away from the 3, we're going to make it a 2. But that means we have 1 floating around. Okay, now that 1, we have to be able to add it to this 3 somehow. Okay, we have to make that, give that 1 a costume. We have to make that 1 look like a fraction. We can't put a whole number. We took a whole away. We can't put a whole number into a fraction. We have to make this whole look like a fraction. And you do that by looking at the denominator. Okay, if this denominator is 9, then my whole is 9/9. You add the numerators together. So 3/9 plus 9/9. Carry your whole number over. 3 plus 9 is 12, and the denominator just carries right across. So my new number is 2 and 12/9. It's improper. It's okay. Leave it improper. And then we just carry our bottom number across, 1 5/9. And now we can subtract. 12 take away 5 is 7. The denominators just carry down. And then 2 take away 1 is 1. So the final answer is 1 7/9. Okay, so that's kind of a little crash look at that. So we're going to start first with page 52. It's out of order, but this page needs to be understood first. Okay, so if we just look at the if we just look at the key on the top here, so we have to regroup. Okay, so we have 3 6/9, but if you notice, there's nothing here, but there's a fraction here. You can't take, if we have nothing here, we can't take 6/9 away from nothing. We have to put something there. But more importantly, we have to put a fraction there. So we're going to cross, then we move over to this step. This was the first look at the problem. The second step is we're going to borrow. We take 3 away. We cross off the 3 and we take 1 away. I'm going to write that 1 up here. I always like to give that visual, that when we borrow something, there's just 1 floating around until we decide to do something with it. So we cross out the 3, we put a 2, there's a 1 floating around. We have to put that 1 into the fraction column, okay? We have to give it a costume, we have to make it look like a fraction. The only way you can make a 1 look like a fraction is when the numerator and denominators match. Now, this 3 didn't have a denominator to look at, so you use the denominator from the problem on the bottom. So this 1 turns into 9/9. Okay? So we have 2 and 9/9 take away 6/9. 2 take away 0 is 2. 9 take away 6 is 3/9. Okay? Now it does say reduce to simplest terms, so we need the greatest common factor. We're going to divide a 3 and a 9 by 3, and we get 2 and 1/3. So it's the borrowing step that you really do have to master on this page. Again, there are 4 pages to look at. I'm only going to do a couple problems from each page, and then I'll show you the answer key. So keep in mind, when nothing is here, you have to put a fraction there, but you can't just make one up. We're going to borrow. I take the 6 and I make it a 5. I have 1 floating around. I have to give that 1 to the fraction column. Okay, I have to give it a costume. I have to make this 1 look like a fraction, but it still has to equal 1. I'm going to borrow the denominator from down here. So this 1 is 8/8. Whenever a numerator and denominator match, you make a whole. So these are equivalent. These are actually equal, even though they look different. This is a whole 1. This is a 1 with a costume, 8/8. Now we can subtract. 8 take away 3 is 5. The denominators just carry down. 5 take away nothing is 5. So our answer is 5 and 5/8. Second problem. Again, we have to give this a fraction. You can't take 2/4 away from nothing. So this 5 becomes a 4. What do I have floating around? The 1 that I borrowed. I have to give this 1 a costume. I have to make it equivalent to a fraction. How do I make a 1 equivalent to a fraction? You borrow the denominator and you make the numerator and denominator match. Okay? That equals 1. So 14 take away 2 is 12. The denominator carries down. 4 take away 0 is 4. The denominator is 14, 14. It should be 14, okay? But we have to simplify. Okay, find the greatest common factor. And if you were to factor these out, you would get a 2. So it's 12 divided by 2 is 6. 14 divided by 2 is 7. So that is the answer for 2. Okay, since you can see 6 and 7 clearly, let's go on with 6 and 7. Although I'll kind of give that its own space a little bit. All right, so again, we're going to subtract. There's nothing here. We have to put something in the fractions column. We're going to cross off the 10. We're going to make it a 9. You're going to narrate this problem, so really listen to how I'm talking through this problem. I cross off the whole and I take 1 away. It's floating around. I have to give it a costume, a fraction costume. I borrow the denominator from the bottom fraction. So 1 is equal to 15/15. I've now given this 1 I borrowed a costume, so it can stay. 15 take away 7 is 8. The denominator simply carries down. That does not change. 9 take away 0 is 9. 9 and 8/15. Okay, I'd like you to narrate this as I do this problem. Okay, and there you go. So that is subtracting when you have to borrow. Okay, I'm gonna, if you want to stop the video so you can complete the page and then come back and check your work, I'm gonna show the answers now. Here's the completed paper. Okay, let's move on to just a couple problems from page 49. I think this one is a little bit, easier. Again, I'm sorry that the copy is crooked. Hopefully we can move through that. So again, like I told you on the addition pages, when you know you're working with one operation on the whole page, just remind yourself of the steps, okay? It literally will take 30 seconds to write it down. So when you subtract, make common denominators. You have to find the LCM. 2, don't forget to convert any improper fractions. I'm abbreviating a little bit. Make common denominators, then make sure you subtract. Then you can convert if you need to, and then of course simplify if needed. This page won't have any borrowing on it. It's a little easier. So let's look at these few problems. We do have to find a common denominator, right? The other page had common denominators, and this one doesn't. So common denominator of an 8 and a 16. If I was to skip count by 8 and skip count by 16, 16 would be it. If you're not sure what is meant by finding a common denominator, then go back and look at your study guide. Whatever I do to the bottom, I do to the top. 8 times 2 is 16. What I do to the bottom, I do to the top. 4 times 2 is 8. Okay, that is what I subtract. 8 take away 2 is 6 sixteenths. Now, those are both even, so that's a hint that you need to simplify. And the GCF is a 2. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. 16 divided by 2 is 8. So our answer is 3/8. Okay, next problem. We have 4/5 take away 1/10. We can't subtract them because they do not have the same denominator. Let's give them the same denominator. If I skip count by 5 and skip count by 10, my LCM is 10. Whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. 10 times 1 is 10. 1 times 1 is 1. 5 times 2 is 10. 4 times 2 is 8. That is what we subtract. 8 take away 1 is 7. Tenths. Does not need to be simplified. Okay. Let's move down to 6. So find that common denominator. Common denominator of 2 and 8 will be 8. Okay, if I was to skip count by 2, skip count by 8, this is the least one they'd have in common. 2 times 4, 1 times 4. 4 take away 3 is 1/8. Okay. And this will be the last problem we do from this page, and I'll show you the answers. Okay, if you skip count by 4 and you skip count by 12, 12 will be your LCM. Ask yourself, what do you do to the old denominator to get to the new denominator? 12 times 1 is 12. 3 times 1 is 3. What do you do to the old denominator to get to the new denominator? 4 times 3 is 12. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 take away 3 is 3. 12. Okay. We do have to simplify, just like we simplified up here. If we were to factor out 3 and 12, the factor they would have the same is 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 12 divided by 3 is 4. The answer is 1/4. Okay. So again, it's a lot of repetition of the same steps. Complete that page, and when you're ready, then take a look at the answer key. Okay, so I'm just going to spend a moment or two on page 50. This one gets this is where we're just putting everything together. We have to borrow, but this time, unlike the other page, we have to borrow and they give you a fraction. On the page 50 that we completed, that fraction space was empty, and we borrowed and we had to use the denominator, okay? So it's the same idea, except now we just have to add something to this numerator to give it more. But it's the exact same steps, okay? First, we have to find common denominators though. So, you know, that's just, we gotta put a lot of different steps together. Have to find a common denominator. That's the first and foremost thing you have to do. If I skip count by 4 and I skip count by 8, my common denominator is going to be an 8. Okay, so what do I do to the old denominator to get to the new denominator? And I'm going to move this over just a little bit. We got to fit a lot of work in here. Okay, so times 1 times 1, and I have 5/8. What do you do to 4 to get to 8? Times 2. What you do to the bottom, you do to the top, times 2. Don't forget about your whole numbers. Normally I carry them over. It's just a lot of numbers to cram into a small space. Use scrap paper. So now I have a 2 and I have a 5. My top number is smaller than my bottom numerator. Therefore I have to borrow. So I cross off my 6. Cross off my 6 and I make it a 5. I have 1 floating around. I have to add this 1 to my numerator, but I have to give it a costume. I have to make it look like a fraction. So borrow the denominator, and you're going to add it to the fraction that's already there. So now this is going to equal 8 plus 2 is 10/8. It's okay to make an improper fraction. Okay. So 5 take away 3 is 2. 10 take away 5 is 5. And my denominator gets carried down. 2 and 5/8. Okay, so let's do problem 2. Find a common denominator first. 10 and a 10. What do you do to the old denominator to get to the new denominator? Times 1 times 1. So it's 6/10. What do you do to the old denominator to get to the new denominator? Times 2 times 2. That's a 2. Okay, top numerator is smaller than the bottom numerator. Just like in regular subtraction, if the top number is smaller, you have to borrow. I have to borrow from the whole number. So the 9 becomes an 8. There's a 1 floating around. And before I can put it over to the fraction, I have to make it look like a fraction. I borrow my denominator, 10 tenths. Just so you know, 10 tenths is the same as 1 whole. When the numerator and denominator match, you make 1 whole. So now I can add it there. So 2 plus 10 is 12. I'm going to go into the next problem. Okay, that's why you should use scrap paper. So I'm going to have 12 tenths take away 6 tenths. Do not forget about your whole numbers over here. 8 take away 4 is 4. 12 take away 6 is 6. And my denominator carries down. You kind of wish you were done, but you're not, because I hope you can pick up that you need to simplify. They're small numbers and they're both even, so chances are the greatest common factor is a 2. I have 4 and 6 divided by 2 is 3. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 4 and 3/5. Okay, so, sorry. So that is for that page. I am going to show you the answer key. So this is a lot of work. This is 16 problems. It's a lot of work. So please don't feel like you have to do it all in one sitting. Maybe do half of it. Maybe do 4 problems for a morning work, and just keep coming back to the page. Okay. Very shortly, I'll be able to scan the answer sheets so you can have them all in one document and not just at the end of a video. But this is good to start with. Okay. Keep practicing these pages. Okay, and then on page 51, there's always one page in this. Okay, so on page 51, this is the last one I'm going to show. This is just like, if you recall, there was a subtraction page that looked very similar to this. Okay, it's not super difficult from the sense that the denominators are the same. So really, it's all about just simplifying for this one. Okay, 8 take away 7 is 1. 4 take away 4 take away 1 is 3. And you carry the denominators over. So the focus for this page is the simplifying. Find the greatest common factor. Greatest common factor of a 3 and a 6 is a 3. So you're going to get 1 and 1/2. Next problem, 5 take away 2 is 3. 3 take away 1 is 2. And the denominator carries over. Okay, we're not quite done. They're both even and they're both small numbers. So the greatest common factor is a 2. That's a good hint that that's a 2. So 3 and 1/4 is our answer. Okay. So that is what we're doing for the rest of that page. Let me show you the answer key. Keep working on that page. This is one of the simpler pages because really you're just focusing. You're not finding common denominators. You're not borrowing. You're just focusing on reducing. So it's a good one to end with. And there's the answer key. Okay, and my friends, you have made it through the most difficult part of fractions. Subtracting fractions out of the 4 operations are the most difficult, and you have completed it. Keep practicing it, and congratulations.